To truly understand Florence, you need to look beyond the beautiful photos and crowded tourist streets. This Italian city, founded by the Romans in 59 BC, has long been a strategic hub of trade, power, and culture in Europe. During the Middle Ages, Florence emerged as one of the leading commercial centers, enriched by the textile trade and powerful bankers. But the real transformation came during the Renaissance, between the 14th and 16th centuries, when Florence became the birthplace of revolutionary art and ideas that would change the world forever. During this period, the Medici family, patrons of the arts, funded and protected artists and thinkers, giving space to figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Machiavelli to develop their genius works. Every street, square, or building you visit in Florence today is a direct result of this glorious past. When you walk through the city, you are literally stepping onto the stage where some of the greatest events in European history unfolded. Now, how about diving deeper into this history by visiting the places that still hold these incredible secrets? If Florence became the cradle of the Renaissance, much of it is due to the power and influence of the Medici family. For nearly 3 centuries, they ruled the city, funded the greatest artists in history, and transformed Florence into one of the most important cultural and financial centers in Europe. But their rise was no accident. It was built with intelligence, strategy, and, of course, immense wealth. The Medici story begins in the 14th century when Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, a shrewd banker, founded the Medici Bank, which quickly became the most powerful financial institution in Europe. With branches across the continent, the Medici controlled transactions for kings, popes, and merchants, becoming indispensable to the European economy. His son, Cosimo de' Medici, known as the Elder, consolidated this power by becoming the unofficial ruler of Florence, using his wealth to influence politics without holding official titles. The dynasty's peak came with Lorenzo de' Medici, called the Magnificent, who ruled between 1469 and 1492. He was not only a political leader, but also a true patron of the arts, funding geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Brunelleschi. Under his rule, Florence flourished culturally, becoming the epicenter of artistic and scientific innovation during the Renaissance. However, the Medici path was also marked by intrigue and betrayal. In 1478, the Puzzi conspiracy attempted to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano inside Florence Cathedral. Giuliano was killed, but Lorenzo survived and brutally punished his enemies. Later, the family was exiled and returned to power multiple times, always regaining their influence. In the 16th century, the Medici went beyond Florence, placing 2 popes in the Vatican, Leo X and Clement VII, and even a queen in France, Catherine de' Medici, who ruled during the most turbulent period in French history. In the end, the Medici dynasty faded in the 18th century, but their legacy lives on in every street, palace, and artwork in Florence. Without the Medici, we might never have seen the splendor of the Renaissance as we know it today. Now that you know the family that built Florence, how about walking the same streets where they shaped history? The Basilica of Santa Croce is an essential chapter in the history of Florence and Europe itself. Founded in 1294, this church became the main symbol of the cultural and intellectual influence Florence achieved in the world. Originally built by the Franciscans, it quickly became a place of honor for important figures in Italian history. From the 15th century, the basilica began housing the tombs of great names like Michelangelo, Galileo Galilei, and Niccolò Machiavelli, key figures who shaped the Renaissance. Michelangelo, for example, despite dying in Rome, had his body secretly brought to Florence by the Florentines as an eternal symbol of the city's genius. Galileo, banned by the church from being honored for many years, finally found his eternal rest here, nearly a century after his death. Beyond the historical tombs, the Basilica of Santa Croce holds treasures of Gothic architecture and carefully preserved frescoes, narrating important historical events in Europe. Visiting it is like stepping directly into the setting where past and present meet, a fascinating connection that remains alive in every stone of the building. And do you know what's most interesting? This journey through Florence's past still holds other curious traditions that have survived time and continue to enchant visitors from around the world. Let's find out what's next. During the Renaissance, Florence was a vibrant, wealthy city full of curious traditions. One of them, which you'll hardly find anywhere else in Europe, is the famous wine windows, or Bocchette del Vino. These small windows appeared in the 16th century, during a time when wine merchants sought a discreet and practical way to serve customers without opening their main doors. At the time, Florence faced difficult periods, such as plagues and epidemics, and these little windows helped keep merchants protected while wine continued to flow through the streets. Over the centuries, many of these windows were closed and forgotten, remaining as silent witnesses to the city's history. Recently, several of them have come back to life, allowing locals and travelers to relive this curious historical tradition. When you order wine through one of these windows, it's easy to imagine yourself in Renaissance Florence, experiencing something truly unique in all of Italy. And since we're talking about traditions preserved over time, how about visiting a historic gelateria that has kept its recipes intact for generations? The history of Palazzo Vecchio dates back to the early 14th century, when Florence needed to assert its political power against rival Italian cities. Designed by Arnolfo di Cambio in 1299, the palace was from the beginning a symbol of the authority and independence of the Florentine Republic. With its solid walls and dominant tower, the structure commanded respect and made it clear who ruled the region. During the Renaissance, the palace gained even more relevance as it became the residence of the influential Medici family, who ruled the city with a mix of economic, artistic, and political power. The famous Hall of the 500, for example, was commissioned in 1494 to host the meetings of the Republic's council, and later, Cosimo I de' Medici transformed it into an impressive demonstration of his dominance over Tuscany. Historically, Palazzo Vecchio was also the stage for political intrigues and power struggles that shaped not only Florence's future, but also influenced European politics for centuries. Today, walking through its halls, you can still feel the energy of the decisions and events that deeply marked the city. And speaking of places marked by history, how about discovering the square that was the stage for dramatic and decisive events in the city? Let's continue the journey. Since its construction in the 13th century, Piazza della Signoria has always been a strategic location in Florence's history. It was not only the heart of Florentine public life, but also witnessed some of the city's most dramatic and significant events, such as political demonstrations, grand celebrations, and even public executions, like that of Girolamo Savonarola in 1498. Historically, this square symbolized the political and artistic power Florence held over Europe during the Renaissance. The sculptures scattered across it, like the replica of Michelangelo's David and the impressive Perseus holding Medusa's head by Cellini, were not just decorative, but reminders to citizens and visitors of the cultural and political strength of Florence's rulers. The Loggia dei Lanzi, another iconic feature of the square, built in 1376, served as an open-air gallery, displaying sculptures that reinforced Florence's image as the city of arts and advanced ideas. Each piece, there was a clear message about Florence's cultural superiority at the time. But now, it's time to visit the place where these works originated and are now preserved, one of the most important and renowned museums in the world. Are you ready for this next historical stop? The history of the Galleria degli Uffizi began in 1560 when Cosimo I de' Medici commissioned Giorgio Vasari to build a structure to house the administrative offices of the Florentine government. Hence the name Uffizi, which literally means offices in Italian. However, no one at the time imagined that these offices would be transformed into one of the most important museums in the world. In the 16th century, Francesco I de' Medici decided to use the space to display the family's art collections, beginning the building's artistic vocation. This is how masterpieces by Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo began filling its halls. Since then, the gallery has become the ultimate symbol of Florence's artistic prestige, attracting visitors and admirers from around the world. The Galleria degli Uffizi has withstood the passage of time, witnessing wars, invasions, and political changes, always protecting priceless cultural treasures that define Europe's artistic identity. Visiting this museum is like stepping directly into the living history of Western art. And since we've mentioned history and resilience, are you ready to explore a bridge that survived the destruction of World War II and became an eternal symbol of the city? The Ponte Vecchio, which literally means Old Bridge, has a history dating back to the Roman period. However, the structure we see today emerged in 1345 after a great flood destroyed the previous bridge. Since then, this bridge has become one of Florence's most iconic images, surviving not only time, but even the devastating battles of World War II. For centuries, the Ponte Vecchio was occupied by butchers and tanners, whose shops were strategically positioned over the Arno River to facilitate waste disposal. However, in the 16th century, Grand Duke Ferdinand I de' Medici ordered that only goldsmiths and jewelers could remain there, starting the tradition that continues to this day. During World War II, while all other bridges in the city were destroyed by retreating Germans, the Ponte Vecchio was spared, legend has it, by direct order from Hitler, who was fascinated by its beauty. Regardless of the truth, the bridge stands firm as an eternal symbol of Florence's historical resilience. And since we're talking about curious stories and local traditions, how about discovering a statue that has become a symbol of luck and tradition in Florence for centuries? Let's continue. The history of the Fontana del Porcellino begins in the 17th century when Grand Duke Cosimo II de' Medici commissioned sculptor Pietro Tacca to create a bronze copy of a Roman statue depicting a wild boar. Originally installed to decorate the gardens of the Pitti Palace, the statue soon became part of Florentine daily life and was eventually moved to the city center, where it remains today. Over the centuries, a curious tradition emerged around the Porcellino. Locals and visitors began rubbing the statue's snout and tossing coins into the fountain to ensure good luck and, most importantly, guarantee their future return to Florence. This popular practice gained so much traction that today, the boar's snout is polished from the countless hands that have touched it. Historically, the Fontana del Porcellino represents a direct connection between the Medici era and modern city life, preserving a living tradition that enchants travelers from around the world and keeps Florentine cultural memory alive. But don't think this is the only historical legacy of the Medici family in the city. Let's now explore the official residence of this powerful dynasty. Are you curious? The Pitti Palace, built in 1458, was initially envisioned by banker Luca Pitti as a way to display his wealth and rival the Medici, who were Florence's greatest patrons. Ironically, due to financial difficulties, the palace ended up being acquired by the Medici family in 1549. From then on, it became the epicenter of aristocratic and political life in Tuscany. Under the Medici, the Pitti Palace was expanded and transformed into a symbol of absolute luxury and power. Cosimo I and his wife, Eleonora of Toledo, hired renowned artists like Giorgio Vasari to decorate its numerous rooms, creating magnificent spaces like the royal apartments and the Palatine Gallery. These areas became private museums, showcasing masterpieces by Raphael, Titian, and Rubens, reflecting the Medici's immense cultural influence. In the gardens surrounding the palace, known as the Boboli Gardens, one of the most sophisticated examples of Renaissance landscaping was conceived, inspiring royal gardens across Europe. The Pitti Palace's architectural and artistic grandeur is not just a display of wealth, but a historical expression of how the Medici culturally shaped an entire era. And speaking of places with intriguing stories that go beyond the obvious, how about discovering a church that was once a market and still holds impressive architectural secrets? The Church of Orsanmichele has a unique and surprising history. Originally founded in the 8th century as a small oratory dedicated to Saint Michael, the site was transformed in the 13th century into a grain market, crucial for Florence's supply. This building became the main hub where merchants traded wheat, a symbol of the city's economic prosperity at the time. In the 14th century, a curious transformation occurred. After a fire, the market was rebuilt and became both a place of commerce and devotion. Gradually, the religious function prevailed, turning it definitively into a church. This change reflects how religion and economy walked hand in hand in Florence's development during the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. The church's exterior is adorned with niches sculpted by great masters of Renaissance sculpture, such as Donatello and Lorenzo Ghiberti. These works reveal how Florentines valued not only spirituality, but also art and commerce, all integrated into a single historical building. But if you think the surprising stories end here, know that Florence still holds more curiosities, especially related to its commercial past. Let's keep exploring. Located in the current Piazza della Repubblica, the Column of Abundance is a monument that carries the memory of Florence's commercial and economic origins. Erected in 1431, it marked the exact point where the main Roman roads crossed, symbolizing the city's economic center since ancient times. Its name, Abundance, was no accident. It represents the wealth brought by trade. Historically, this column was more than just a decorative structure. It served as a physical reference for merchants and travelers, marking the city's most prosperous area. At the top of the column, a statue representing the Roman goddess of abundance was placed, clearly symbolizing the region's economic and mercantile importance. Even after various urban transformations, especially during the 19th century, the Column of Abundance remains as a silent witness to the economic prosperity that turned Florence into a European center of commerce and culture. It reminds Florentines and visitors of the city's glorious past. And speaking of unique and glorious perspectives, how about climbing a historical spot to see Florence from above? Join me. Giotto's bell tower is not just a bell tower, but a monumental testament to Florence's rise as an artistic and political power in the Middle Ages. Begun in 1334 by the renowned painter and architect Giotto di Bondone, it was conceived to be more than an annex to the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. It was a visual manifesto of Florentine prestige, rising to the sky as a symbol of the city's greatness. Unfortunately, Giotto died just 3 years after starting the project, leaving the work unfinished. Andrea Pisano took over the construction, but it was only under Francesco Tellini that the tower was completed in 1359. Every architectural detail reflects the obsessive pursuit of perfection and harmony, fundamental characteristics of Florentine art. White marble from Carrara, green from Prato, and red from Siena were used to create a visual effect that evoked the city's grandeur. But the bell tower wasn't just for beautifying Florence's skyline. For centuries, the ringing of its bells announced crucial events, from religious ceremonies to enemy attacks and government assemblies. It was, in essence, the voice of Florence, resonating throughout the city. Today, climbing its 414 steps not only offers a stunning view, but also revives centuries of history, marked by the tolling of bells that once dictated the rhythm of Florentine life. And speaking of historical landmarks, our next destination takes us to one of Florence's oldest and most sacred buildings. Are you ready to step into history? The Baptistry of St. John is one of Florence's oldest buildings, with origins dating back to the late Roman Empire. Records suggest its base may have been an ancient pagan temple dedicated to Mars, adapted to Christianity as the city became an important religious center. In the 11th century, as Florence emerged as a commercial and cultural power, the baptistry was rebuilt in the Romanesque style, with white and green marble, reflecting the city's growing prestige. More than a religious building, the baptistry represented an essential rite of passage for Florentines. For centuries, all citizens, including Dante Alighieri, had to be baptized here to be officially recognized by the city. In the 15th century, it gained its greatest jewel, The Gates of Paradise by Lorenzo Ghiberti, who spent 27 years creating biblical scenes in bronze, using innovative perspective techniques. Michelangelo, upon seeing them, declared they were worthy of heaven itself, cementing them as a Renaissance landmark. The Baptistry of St. John is not just a temple, but a symbol of Florence's transition from a Roman colony to the cradle of modern art and thought. Now, how about exploring the monumental Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, an architectural feat that challenged the limits of medieval engineering? The construction of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore began in 1296. in a Florence that was growing as an economic and cultural power. The city wanted a temple to rival the great cathedrals of Europe and symbolize its wealth and ambition. However, there was a challenge. The project included a colossal dome, larger than any ever built before, and no one knew exactly how to erect it. For over a century, the cathedral remained unfinished until, in 1418, a competition was launched to solve the problem. The winner was Filippo Brunelleschi, a goldsmith with no formal architectural training but a deep knowledge of engineering and mathematics. Inspired by the Dome of the Pantheon in Rome and ancient techniques, Brunelleschi designed a revolutionary method, building the dome without wooden supports, using an innovative spiral brick system and a complex play of structural tensions. When completed in 1436, the dome of the Duomo not only crowned the cathedral but redefined the limits of medieval engineering, becoming an icon of the Renaissance. Michelangelo, when designing the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, later said he wanted to create something grand, but not greater than the dome of Florence's Duomo. This masterpiece solidified Florence as the epicenter of artistic and architectural innovation of its time. And now, how about exploring a place that also symbolizes the city's vibrant movement, where history and commerce intertwine for centuries? Let's continue. In the heart of Florence, Piazza di San Lorenzo is much more than a commercial center. It's a reflection of the city's economic rise since the Middle Ages. In the 11th century, Florence established itself as one of Europe's greatest mercantile centers, and this square became the epicenter of commercial transactions, where merchants traded fabrics, spices, and precious metals brought from distant lands. The proximity to the Basilica of San Lorenzo, funded by the Medici, made the square even more strategic. During the 15th century, with the rise of this family to power, the area flourished economically. The market that emerged there was frequented by artisans specializing in leather and goldsmithing, crafts that would become trademarks of the city. It was in this environment that the Medici strengthened their financial influence, turning Florence into one of Europe's main economic hubs during the Renaissance. But if San Lorenzo was the epicenter of the Medici's spiritual and political power, there's another place that represents the daily life of Florentines, a market that, for centuries, fed the city and kept its traditions alive. Let's explore it. Since its inauguration in 1874, Il Mercato Centrale Firenze has been a reflection of Florence's culture and commercial spirit. Built during Italy's unification, this market emerged as part of a city modernization project, inspired by the iron and glass markets of Paris and London. Its structure, designed by Giuseppe Mangoni, the same architect behind Milan's Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, introduced a new concept of public space where tradition and progress met. Historically, Florence has always been a mercantile hub, and Il Mercato Centrale preserves this heritage. For centuries, open-air markets in Piazza della Repubblica were the heart of Florentine commercial life. But as the city grew, the need for a covered space arose, where farmers, butchers, and bakers could offer their products in a more organized way. Since then, Illinois Mercato Centrale has become a meeting point for locals and merchants, keeping alive the tradition of Tuscan gastronomy. Today, strolling through its aisles is like reliving the history of a city that has always valued its culinary identity. Among stalls of aged pecorino cheese, artisanal cured meats, and Chianti wines, the market remains a symbol of Florence's passion for good food and the preservation of its roots. But if gastronomy feeds the body, history feeds the soul. And Florence, with all its grandeur, still holds secrets that continue to fascinate the world. If you're fascinated by Florence's history, you'll love exploring the city in person. In the next video, we'll take you on an incredible tour of its most iconic landmarks. So don't wait. Click now and embark on this journey.